Hi everyone, welcome back to another Reading with Raptors here at the University of Minnesota Raptor Center here on the St. Paul campus. We are back on site at the Raptor Center after taking a little bit of a field trip last week to go off site, and we are indoors where it's very nice and echoey. We're indoors today. I think the weather here in Minnesota today is a little bit iffy. And we also have been doing some really exciting work earlier today and kind of over the last week or so. We've been starting to do some more kind of off-site programs for different school groups. So this Bald Eagle and I were actually both in here earlier because the Bald Eagle... This might be a problem. The Bald Eagle was kind of joining in on a program that we were putting on for some elementary school students before this. So there's a little bit of mess already. We're still pretty hungry. There was some enrichment given, so she got... So she got some egg cartons and paper towel tubes with food in them already. I also have one more egg carton half with, I think the back end of a rat that I'll be giving to her after we read our book for the day. And very fittingly, I figured that this would be a good bird to do this with. We're going to be reading a book called Bird Talk, What Birds Are Saying and Why. And we will probably be interrupted by some bird talk of our own, which I think will just really add to the experience. So you might hear some bald eagle yelling. Maybe turn your volume down a little bit if you need to. She can be quite loud. But I think that it's always a really good display of that really typical bald eagle vocalization. You could see that whole display that she was doing, where she's kind of flinging her head back. Sometimes she'll also kind of flap her wings. Someone's cat is also getting a lot of enrichment out of this too, which is fantastic. So I'll try not to talk over her too much. I'll probably just let her vocalize. But just as a heads up that will probably be happening as we go about this. We also have a water pan in the back she might take a bath in, especially after she eats some food. So we should have a fun little time here. So we're going to start off with here, Bird Talk, What Birds Are Saying and Why. And this is both written and illustrated by Lita Judge. So, be a nice overview. So here's the front page, is Bird Talk. Oh, there's another front page. We'll see both of those birds later on in the book, so I won't talk about them now. Chirp, warble, quack, coo, rattle, screech. In backyards, meadows, and forests, the air is filled with bird talk. But what are they saying? There's a nice robin and a lot of birds going on. Pick me! Male songbirds go all out to get noticed in the spring. Here we have some bird of paradise with those flashy feathers. Whir, whir, whir. A blue bird of paradise sings to attract a mate and defend his territory. To make sure a female notices, he flips upside down and swings frantically to and fro. There's that bird of paradise. The melodious song and bright-colored feathers of an American goldfinch say, "Choose me, I'm the healthiest." Like most songbirds, the female is quieter and drabber, the better to sit unnoticed on her nest. There are those American goldfinches. You can see the little babies down here in the nest. An American robin sings hundreds of different songs. The more complicated his song, the more he says, "I have the most experience. I'll make the best mate." There's that American robin. Couple of birds we'll see a lot of around here right now, the goldfinch and the robin. I'm the strongest. Not all birds sing to attract mates and claim their territory. Some males strut, bang, and boom. So you can see these. The next page we'll talk about them a little bit more. To catch the eye of a female, male sage grouse puff up their feathers and strut like runway models. Then they make loud popping sounds by blowing up air sacs and rubbing their wings across the chest. Plop, plop, plop. So these are the air sacs that they inflate on their chests. So underneath their feathers, they have these little sacs of air that they can blow up. It's pretty cool. Gobble, gobble, gobble. Wild turkeys strut as well, but their naked heads are covered in wattles that turn scarlet red. The bird with the biggest, brightest wattles usually wins. So there's that wild turkey and that very impressive wattle has hanging down over its beak. A palm cockatoo is a regular one-man hard rock band. He whistles and bobs his head. Then he breaks off a stick to drum against a tree. The message is clear to other males. Stay away! This is my tree! There's that palm cockatoo holding a stick there in its feet. And of course, bald eagles make sound too. Let's do the blue-footed booby dance. Many birds dance to communicate with a future mate. So you can see these birds waving around those bright blue feet. Very impressive dance. Blue-footed boobies don't want to be confused with red-footed boobies, so the male lifts his feet, proudly showing their bright blue color. If a female likes what she sees, she joins the dance, announcing, "We belong together." So you can see they're different colors of feet. That's how they know who's who. Western grebes dance in perfect unison by running across the water like a pair of water skiers. After their fancy footwork, the partners present weeds to each other as if to say, "And this is how we will build our nest." So you can see the grebes running across the water and then presenting the weeds. Indian saurus cranes bow and leap, performing an elegant ballet. They trumpet loudly and throw sticks into the air, proclaiming, "We are paired. We will build a nest together." Their bond is so strong, they mate for life. So these are the Indian saurus cranes. Very tall birds, as cranes usually are. Greetings. Birds who share nesting duties have a lot to say to each other. You can see them bowing their heads backwards. A pair of European white storks greet one another each time one parent returns to the nest. They throw their heads forward and back, clattering their bills. A male rhinoceros hornbill says, "I will provide," as he brings food to his mate. The female has sealed herself inside a tree nest for 3 months, incubating eggs and caring for her young. So you can see where the rhinoceros hornbill gets its name, that big casque on the top of its beak. And then right here poking out, you can see the beak of the female. They've built the nest around her, so she's in there for 3 whole months. When a northern gannet returns from fishing, she and her mate stand on tiptoe over the nest. The one to leave its bill pointing skyward the longest says, "My turn to take off." So you can see the northern gannets with their beaks pointing up, and then at the bottom, there's the little chick that they are keeping well fed. Over here, parents and chicks learn the sound of each other's voices. You can see all of these penguins, all of those very identical looking youngsters. Emperor penguin parents must find their chicks among thousands after they return from fishing in the sea. The chick calls eagerly. In the deafening noise, the parent trumpets back until they are reunited. You can see. You can see the chick and the parent have been successfully reunited here. If danger is near, a mother common merganser calls to her chicks, "Stay close." The family swims to safety. This is that common merganser with their long fishing beaks. And there are all the babies staying close and safe. A flamingo chick peeps softly before it has even hatched. Its parent chirps back, offering encouragement to break free from the egg. You can see the feet and the beak of this parent flamingo. And right here, that tiny little crack that tells you that a chick is trying to hatch. I'm not here. Some birds use trickery to protect themselves and their nests. Can you spot the bird in this picture? Right here. Do you see this bird hiding among the reeds? Let's see what it says about that. The American bittern has a loud booming call, but when danger draws near, she sits still as a stone. Her lie, "I'm not here," is convincing even to the keenest eye. A sun bittern blends into her surroundings with striped brown and gray feathers. But if a hawk comes close, she fans her tail and flashes red patches on golden wings, saying, "Stay back, I'm a devil-eyed monster." You can see the sun bittern. You can see why this might be kind of confusing. If you were trying to eat this bird and suddenly it pulls out that, I would think that would be kind of scary. When a fox stalks near the nest of a North American killdeer, Mama screams and flaps a wing awkwardly. Her broken wing trick says, "Follow me, I'm injured, I'm a better meal." She stays just out of reach, luring the fox away from her eggs. So you can see the eggs down here. This is the mother killdeer pretending to have a broken wing and luring away that hungry fox. Look out, we're under attack. Within a flock, birds communicate to protect themselves. So you can see a couple of crows in a flock and this great horned owl in the middle. Caw, caw! An American crow shrieks in alarm when a great horned owl comes near. Instead of flying to safety, the flock joins her. They scold and mob the predator, chasing it away. You can see it's working. They're chasing away that great horned owl. But when a crow prowls for eggs, Scandinavian fieldfares declare war. "Chat, chat," they warn. If the intruder doesn't flee, they dive at the crow, dumping missiles of poop. They did not draw the poop missiles, unfortunately, but we can see the crow trying to steal that egg, and those fieldfares are not happy about it. Sometimes it's safer to sound the alarm quietly. When a purple finch spots a hawk overhead, he makes a short "seep" call that says, "Keep quiet, danger is near." Quickly, the flock takes cover. So you can see the hawk up here, and then hiding in these bushes, you can see the purple finch sounding that alarm. "Come on, fly!" A mother's call encourages her young. Here we have two peregrine falcons, one in the nice adult feathers and one in the juvenile or teenager feathers. Let's see what it says. A young peregrine falcon is nervous to take his first flight from high on a cliff nest. Mother sits in a nearby tree calling sharply with food. Eventually, he flaps toward her. She continues the training until he can grab prey in mid-air. So there's that peregrine falcon adult calling to that young peregrine falcon over here. A blue jay listens for the call of his hungry youngster. The fledgling has left the nest but isn't ready to fly. Her parent answers with tender feeding calls as he brings her next meal. So you can see this adult blue jay. There we go. Adult blue jay, and there's that baby calling for food. Looks like something yummy like an acorn. Cut, cut, cut. A mother wood duck summons her chicks just after they've hatched. They can't fly, but they can swim and find food once they leave their tree nest. Jump! So you can see, wood ducks have really interesting nests where you can see the mother duck and the other babies down here, but they nest up high in holes in trees, so the babies have to jump out of these tall trees to get down to their pond. Listen and learn. Some birds don't just sing from Some birds don't just sing from instinct alone. They learn to mimic or imitate the calls and sounds of birds around them. So you can see what it looks like an older parrot and these young parrots listening in. Let's see what else it says. Baby scarlet macaws learn to mimic calls the way human babies learn to talk, by listening to their parents. So there's that scarlet macaw learning from its parent how to make those noises. Northern mockingbirds even mimic other bird songs. What better way to say to a mate, "Choose me, I'm the smartest"? They can be noisy neighbors, even imitating man-made sounds like car alarms, ambulance sirens, and cell phone rings. So you can see that northern mockingbird. Maybe this time it's imitating this car noise. African gray parrots are excellent mimics. Many learn to repeat people's voices, but one named Alex learned to use words with human meaning. With his vocabulary of about 150 words, he could name objects, count to 6, ask and answer questions, and request rewards. This one says, "I want a nut." Whether they sound like people or sing a song, birds are talking, just like you. Here's that African gray parrot, maybe picking out between two numbers. Here in the back, there's some really nice descriptions of a couple of birds that we saw. So if you have any questions about the birds that were there. A lot of them are birds that we have living here in North America. Some of them are from pretty far away though. I'm trying to think if there are any really exciting ones. There's the rest of the art there. So that is bird talk. Again, joined by our own very vocal bird, this bald eagle. So it was bird talk. Hopefully you all enjoyed hearing more about all the things that birds are saying out there in the wild. This particular bald eagle, who is making so much noise of her own, she is our resident female bald eagle. So she is the largest bird who lives here at the Raptor Center, coming in at a nice 10 pounds or so, which as far as raptors go, is a pretty big raptor. So she has been here at the Raptor Center for about 21 years. She's 21 years old. She's been here since she was a first-year bird. So when she was first brought to the Raptor Center, she didn't actually have that white head, that white tail, and the yellow beak and eyes. She had all kind of dark brown feathers, dark brown eyes, and even a really dark brown beak. It took about 5 or 6 years for her to grow into these adult colors. So that's how we know pretty much how old she is because she had the really identifiable kind of young, juvenile, or teenage colors when she was first brought into the Raptor Center. So she lives with us because she actually has an injury on her wing. It's an injury on her left elbow, just like your elbow here, where, as you can tell, she can fold her wings in pretty well. I'll give her some food here in a little bit. I think that's part of what's going on. But she's not able to fully extend or fully tuck in that left wing like she needs to be able to fly on her own out in the wild for the long distances that she would need to be able to survive and hunt on her own. So that's why she lives here at the Raptor Center. And that's why she's been an excellent teacher about bald eagles for pretty much that whole time. She is one of our kind of main birds who normally is going out and seeing people, or in this case is an excellent video star, makes for some excellent, really good noises and really good demonstrations. So I'm gonna go ahead and give her this chunk of food. I have, like I said, this is the back half of a rat. I know, some enthusiasm for rats here in the chat also. So I have the back half of a rat, so you might see a little bit of tail or feet or something like that. And it's inside of half of an egg carton. So I'm gonna just toss it on over there and see if we can watch her eat it. So here we go. Oh, it opened up. I think she'll still probably rip up that egg carton. I think we should be able to see here still pretty well. I'll try to tilt this down just a wee bit. Maybe. Working on it. I'll stop fiddling with it. So you can see she kind of looks around, figures out, okay, how am I gonna get down there to go and eat that? Okay, I'll go over here first, then we'll go and work on that. Make sure I'm out of the way so you can see her. So what she's going to do is something really important for raptors, and it's some of the really key features that raptors have, which is she's going to use her feet with those talons, those curved, sharp claws that she has on the ends of her toes. We call them talons. And she's going to use those talons and her strong feet to hold on to that chunk of rat. And then she's using her curved, sharp beak to carefully rip apart that piece of rat. Now, I know that normally this bald eagle, if she was really, really hungry, if this was the first food that she'd had all day and she really was feeling hungry, she could swallow the back half of this rat with no problem. She can swallow some really big pieces of food whole. But since she's eaten most of her food already today with some of the other online programs she's been doing, she's taking a little bit of extra time to rip it into some smaller pieces before finishing swallowing the rest whole. So right now she's just working on finishing swallowing that tail, which is always, I think, a tricky bit for them to get down all the way. All the food that she's eating is going into what's called her crop, which is kind of like a storage tank at the top of her chest. She's pretty fluffed right now, so it's hard to see. I moved my hands. I think she thought I maybe had more for her. So you can't really see too much, but right now she has, turn this back so you can see her. So she has that storage tank kind of in the top of her chest before the food goes down to her stomach that'll kind of store that rat piece until she's in a really good comfy spot, and then you'll see her right now even, you can see her kind of adjusting her neck. It looks kind of weird almost. Kind of like if you had something stuck in your throat and you kind of adjusted your neck a little bit. So what she's doing is she has to move her head to move the food from the crop into her stomach. But now, even though she's done eating and she knows that all the food is gone, she's still gonna rip apart that egg carton. Because when you're a raptor and ripping apart things is really what you're made to do, ripping apart things can be maybe kind of fun, kind of interesting. We like to make sure that a lot of the birds have a lot of enrichment, so things that will keep them physically active and mentally active. So that way they get to do a lot of the same activities that they would do out in the wild, just kind of adjusted for living with people. So normally a bald eagle would spend a lot of time maybe looking for fish in a lake or a river, or they would be spending time looking for large carcasses or dead animals that they would need to then rip apart. So we want to make sure that we kind of provide some of that. Even though I don't have a big chunk of roadkill for her to eat or a big lake for her to fish in, I can still give her some things where she has to kind of figure out how to get her food, how to rip things apart. She can clean off her beak just like she would on a branch or a rock. So she's doing something called feaking, F-E-A-K-I-N-G, feaking, where she's gonna kind of clean off her beak to get any little extra bits and pieces off. That also helps kind of wear down her beak. It's growing just like your fingernails and your hair are. It's growing all the time. So she needs to kind of wear it down a little bit so it stays nice and sharp. And I have a feeling she's going to end up in that water pan, at least for a second, here in a moment. But I do see a question, which is, which do they digest better, cooked or raw meat? That's actually a really good question, right? Because we think of, my gosh, if we try to eat too much raw meat, it makes us really sick. So what do these birds digest better? And they really digest raw meat the best. Cooked meat, it's not really something that normally they'd be able to get at, right? Because normally out in the wild, they don't get to carry around a nice microwave with them or anything like that. So they're gonna eat pretty much just raw meat, and that's what their stomachs are best suited to digesting. So really just raw meat. But the kinds of raw meat, that is where they get a lot of variety. So for bald eagles, like I said, they are really good for fishing, really great at finding and catching fish right out of the water. They are also scavengers, so they are also able to take fish that are either already dead or have just been caught by other birds or other animals. So they might be stealing fish from an osprey or another bald eagle, or maybe a fish that something like a bear caught and then left aside for a second. They can swoop down and grab it. So they're able to scavenge a lot of those fish and other kind of things near water. On occasion, they might catch a bird near the water, like a duck or something like that, but usually they're only looking for fish or kind of already dead things on the side of those waterways. Or they can also look for things that are dead in other places, like larger open field type areas. Or across most of the US and kind of North America, you can also see them eating roadkill on the sides of roads. So a lot of times you'll see them eating things like dead deer or other kinds of dead mammals on the sides of the road. So that is also a big source of food for them, are all of those animals that would have died out in the wild. And now that we have so many roads with so much roadkill on the side of it, that also is a source of food for them as well. So they're really serving a lot as kind of our cleanup crew, helping to get rid of some of those dead animals so that they're not sitting out causing diseases or things like that. We're able to get these cleanup crew, our scavengers, in to help us kind of get rid of some of all of that. So yes, to answer your question, raw meat is the way to go, but lots of different kinds of raw meat. That little kind of shoulder shrug kind of look thing that she's doing, that is her adjusting that crop. She has to kind of move the food from her crop into her stomach. So when she kind of adjusts her neck, so when she adjusts her neck like that, that's her moving that food into her stomach. How fast can they fly? And then, yes, Claire, I see your question. That excellent lead in for that. So how fast can they fly? So bald eagles are doing a lot of soaring. They have really long wingspan. So even though this bird only weighs about 10 pounds or so, her wingspan is about 6 feet across. So for most bald eagles here in Minnesota or kind of the upper Midwest, their wingspan is going to be between 5.5 to 6 feet long, usually on average. So they have really long wings, so that means that they're really well suited for soaring through the air. So they can kind of, if they're kind of following the wind or kind of swooping down, they might go decently fast, maybe 50 miles an hour or so. They're usually not the speediest of birds. Usually their main strength in flying is putting their wings out, kind of getting altitude or height up off of the ground, and then soaring in big circles through the air. So usually not too much relying on their speed, which luckily, if you're going after fish who are swimming unaware underneath the water, or you're looking at a delicious dead deer somewhere, you're really not too worried about going too fast, because a lot of your prey isn't really going to be able to run away or really know that you're coming. So that soaring flight style works really well for bald eagles. So someone brought up lead poisoning, and I've been talking so much about bald eagles' role as scavengers that lead poisoning is actually a really big deal. So for bald eagles, so here, so a few things. First of all, I know, sorry, hopefully no one's wearing loud headphones right now. So bald eagles are only native to North America, which means you can only find them here in the United States, our neighbors to the north up in Canada, and then in the kind of the northern part of Mexico. But that's about it. They're really only found here in North America. And so what that means is that for a while, bald eagles, when we talk about them being an endangered species in the United States and the rest of North America, for so long, especially in the second kind of half of the 1900s, that was a really big deal because that was the entire population of bald eagles that didn't live anywhere else. So if they were in trouble in the United States and Canada, that means that was the whole population of bald eagles that was in trouble. It's So I mention this because bald eagles for a long time were on the endangered species list and were taken off kind of at the turn of the new century, I believe 1999. When their numbers finally got high enough, they'd recovered from some of the damage that had been done to them during the last 100 years or so, where they were oftentimes being shot at by people who were worried that they were going to eat some of their animals or kind of bother any of the other things that they might have had going on. They were, for a long time in the early part of the 1900s, they were also shot at for their feathers or other body parts. And then one of the other things that they were doing is they were being slowly poisoned by a pesticide, or kind of an insect-killing chemical called DDT, which was sprayed all over everywhere. And it was really good at killing insects, but what it did in birds was that once it got into the food web, is it would get into insects, fish would eat the insects, and then bald eagles would eat the fish. So bald eagles got a lot of this DDT pesticide in their bodies. And what it did is that it made their eggshells really thin. So when bald eagles would go to sit on their eggs to incubate them or to keep them warm, they would actually crush their own eggs. So for a long time, we weren't seeing very many new bald eagles to replace the other bald eagles who either got old or sick or were otherwise hurt. So we had a really small number of bald eagles living in the United States for a long time. We were finally able to protect them and help them enough so that now we have a ton of bald eagles, especially here in the upper Midwest. We have one of the largest bald eagle populations in the United States and North America. Alaska also is pretty famous for having a ton of bald eagles because they are surrounded by water. Florida also has a lot of bald eagles. They also have a ton of water there with the ocean. But here with our wonderful lakes and rivers, we have a lot of bald eagles living in this area, which is fantastic. But then that brings me to, well, what kind of dangers are there for bald eagles now that we've solved some of these other problems? What might still be going on? So one of the things I mentioned earlier was that sometimes they are scavenging by the side of roads. So certainly being hit by cars, either by flying in front of them or standing too close to the road, that can be a problem, certainly. That's one of the main reasons why we see a lot of birds here at the Raptor Center is collision injuries. But one of the other big things, especially for our bald eagles, is lead poisoning. So because they are scavengers, if there are either a whole dead deer or parts of a dead deer, like its organs, the guts that are inside of it, if those are left out in the woods somewhere, and a bald eagle finds them and starts to eat them, if that deer has ever been shot with a lead bullet, the lead bullet shatters into tons of teeny, 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 tiny fragments. And bald eagles, as you probably saw when she was eating that rat, they are not very delicately picking through their food, are they? They are swallowing big chunks of food at a time. So if there are little pieces of metal inside of those guts or inside of the meat of that deer, the bald eagles are really likely to swallow it, so it ends up in their stomach. The problem with that is lead is a metal that is really what we call toxic. It's kind of poisonous. It hurts people, it hurts bald eagles, it hurts a lot of different animals because it's not really supposed to be inside of our bodies. So when bald eagles eat these teeny tiny pieces of lead, they go into their stomach and they slowly make them really, really sick, depending on how much they ate. And because they're so small, like I said, this bird only weighs about 10 pounds, it doesn't take very much lead to make them really, really sick. Because the bigger your body is, the harder it is for something to poison you, just because you have so much kind of body mass. But because they only weigh about 10 pounds, there's not a lot of body mass to kind of deal with all of that lead. So it just takes teeny tiny pieces. So what we are trying to work on is trying to help people find better alternatives to those lead bullets. There's some other options that people can use because deer hunting is really important. It's how we can control our deer populations and keep those herds really healthy. It's a great activity for a lot of people to do with their families and things like that. But it's really important that we also do it in a way that's exactly the wonderful comment in the chat too, is that lead makes all of us really sick. So we've already removed lead from a lot of things that we used to have out in the environment. We've stopped using it in our gasoline. We've stopped using it in our paints. We're trying really hard to get rid of the places where we do have lead kind of out in the environment. So this is just another place that we can remove lead from to keep us all healthier, both us, our bald eagles, and the rest of the ecosystem. So we're working really hard on helping people find alternatives to some of those kind of lead-based bullets, so that way we can find some other alternatives, so that way we're not accidentally putting lead out into the environment where bald eagles can easily eat it and get really sick. So most of the bald eagles who are brought into the Raptor Center have some sort of lead in their system. Kind of depends on how much they have, if it's a real big case of lead poisoning or not. Sometimes they can be so sick that there's really not much we can do to help them. The damage is irreversible once it's done. Luckily for this bald eagle, she was brought in with lead in her system and she was having some effects of it. But we were able to kind of remove the lead from her system and prevent any really major effects. So now the lead doesn't really affect her, but it certainly was a thing that we had to deal with and that she had to deal with when she was first brought to the Raptor Center, along with the elbow injury that she also had. So it just made her healing process that much more complicated. So that is a bit about lead and bald eagles. It's kind of one of the biggest kind of conservation issues, one of the biggest conservation issues that bald eagles currently face. It's also a pretty big deal not so much in the upper Midwest, but in further south areas where vultures are around year-round. For turkey vultures, black vultures, and the California condor is also a major issue for them. Here in the upper Midwest, it doesn't affect our vulture populations as much because during our main deer hunting season, when we have that large amount of kind of lead out in the environment, our turkey vultures aren't around because it's the winter, so they've all migrated south. So luckily we are able to avoid some of those issues, but certainly in other parts of the US and certainly a lot of the rest of the world, it can be a pretty big deal for a lot of scavengers having lead poisoning. Okay, I see a couple of other questions. Well, I'll finish since we're finishing talking about lead. Someone was asking about how we purge lead from a bird. So there's kind of two things that need to be done. One of them is that you need to actually physically remove the pieces of lead from their stomachs because they're still in there usually. The pieces of lead are still in there. So you have to actually basically flush out the bird's stomach. So you almost have to, I know we have some pictures of it, maybe we can find some of those. But you basically have to kind of like tilt the bird upwards so that way kind of anything that's in their stomach will kind of flow out, and you kind of have to almost like wash out the stomach to be able to get all those pieces of lead out. So it's a pretty intense process for the bird to be able to get those kind of little pieces of lead out of their stomachs. And then the other problem is that your body, and this is true for us mammals as well as for birds, but our bodies store lead in our fat tissue. And so for a bald eagle, for example, if it has lead that's been in its body, that lead is now attached to its fat tissue. And if it then experiences stress, for example, being hit by a car or something like that, and it's not able to get food, it's going to start using those fat stores, which releases more lead. And then if it's in a clinic situation where it's around people, it's also probably going to be a little bit stressed. And so it's also going to be releasing those fat stores. So it's going to release more and more of that lead. So we have to kind of detach the lead little molecules from that fat tissue with some chemicals. It's a process called chelation. So basically we have to inject some fluids into the bird that will kind of separate the lead from the fat tissue in order to really help that bird flush it all out of their system. So it's a pretty complicated and intense process that can be kind of rough on the body as well. So yeah, really good questions about lead. I see a couple of other ones. See a couple of other questions I'll try to use too. Claire is posting some excellent other info on not using non-lead sinkers for fishing too. That's great for lead poisoning in eagles and other water birds like trumpeter swans, for example. So really just trying to think about using metals other than lead. Copper, stainless steel, things like that are some really great alternatives to lead. We don't really want to be putting that out into the environment. Okay, so how large can their nests become? We're going to switch gears a little bit. So if you've never been able to see a bald eagle nest in person, definitely there are some great spots here in the Twin Cities, even if you are local, where you can spot some bald eagle nests. They are huge. They are enormous. So bald eagle nests will need to fit. So bald eagles are going to lay between 1 and 3 eggs. And on a really good year, they might be able to raise all 3 of those babies to adulthood. So that means that you're going to lay 3 eggs that are about the size of a goose egg. So maybe like twice in size of like a chicken egg or so. So maybe a little bit smaller than like the size of your fist or so. You're gonna have those eggs, but that means a month to 2 months after hatching, those eagles are gonna be adult-sized. So you're gonna have 5 adult-sized eagles living in the same tree. So those nests are pretty big. The largest nest that they ever encountered was one that had been in use for decades, with different generations of bald eagles coming in and adding on sticks every year. The largest nest that they ever found was almost 2 tons in weight before it snapped the tree in half and fell down. Luckily, somebody thought to weigh all of the parts of the nest to see how heavy it actually was before it broke the tree that it was in. So these nests are usually a good 5 or 6 feet across. They also can get, like I said, pretty deep. They can get pretty tall in size because every year those bald eagles are adding on new sticks, new nesting materials. And then you also get all of the little bits and pieces that can accumulate in there over time as those youngsters are being fed. So those nests can get pretty big, but it makes sense, right? You have to fit those pretty large babies in there. Again, you might have up to 3 in a nest, so you need a pretty big nest to fit all of that in there. And somebody was asking, Ben wants to know, why do they have a white head? I always love these questions about bird colors. So it's always a little bit tricky, right? It's kind of hard to figure out why exactly they have a white head, because there's a lot of reasons why that might be good, but we don't know exactly why that happened. But I can tell you a few things that are probably factors in why they have that white head and that white tail. So the first thing is that they are a lot of their close cousins. There are kind of a family of fishing eagles all around the world. And so all of these kind of fishing eagle cousins, almost all of them have either a white head, a white tail, or both, which means that they probably all had a very long ago ancestor eagle who was also a fishing eagle who at some point developed either that white head or that white tail or both. So they probably share there's probably something that happened a really, really, really long time ago that made it so that that white head and that white tail were really good to have. The other thing I will tell you is that a lot of times in birds, if they have white feathers, especially a lot of white feathers that only show up on the adult birds, is a lot of times it's a really great way to show other bald eagles or other adult birds that you are super healthy. White feathers are hard to take care of. They're easy to get really dirty and messy. If you have any parasites like lice or mites on your feathers that are eating or wearing away at your feathers, it shows up really obviously because of the white color. So white feathers that look really nice and healthy and glossy, those are a really good sign that that bird is really healthy and able to take care of itself. So it might also be a way for adult birds to communicate to each other, hey, I'm an adult bird. I am very good at taking care of myself. I would be very good at taking care of young bald eagles too. The third thing, this is one of my favorite kind of cool sciencey things, is that white feathers are weaker than darker feathers. The color inside of feathers, the pigment called melanin, that melanin actually makes feathers stronger. So that's another reason why white feathers might be a sign that a bird is really healthy, because white feathers don't just show all of the dirt or grime or things, they're also more fragile, so it's a little bit harder to take care of them. So if you have really good condition white feathers, you must be very good at taking care of yourself. That's also the reason why a lot of times if you see a bird who looks pretty white overall, if you look at a gull, for example, we have a lot of gulls around here right now. If you look at a gull, most of its body is white or like a very light gray. But if you look at the ends of its wings, on its wingtips, those long feathers are usually black because they need those outermost feathers to stay in really good shape to help them fly and do that really quick turning and agile flying. So they really need those feathers to stay in really good condition, so they make those feathers the strongest kind of feather, those black feathers. So something really important for feathers is that color. So I don't know why exactly they have white heads, but those are a couple of reasons why a white head might be beneficial to them. Might be a couple different things going on. So really good question. I would love to see Love to see more future research on why exactly that is. But those are a couple things going on. I've moved my hands again, so I think she thought maybe there was more food. Here's a fluffy feather that just kind of flew over here. This is a downy feather. You can see it kind of billowing. This is the downy feather that she has. That she has underneath, oh, one more. There we go. That she has underneath all those kind of really nice, kind of shiny, glossy feathers. She's like, oh, there's gotta be food in that hand. But this is what those fluffy feathers look like. So this is the downy feathers. You can see it's very, very fluffy. It's very soft too. So those are the feathers that keep these bald eagles warm. All right, other questions. Yeah, right, more rats or cartons? Absolutely. I know, I wish I had more stuff for her. I've got a couple little, I've got some random pieces of like cardboard, but most of them are pieces that have already been used. Let's see, would you like more of this? Can maybe play with it? It doesn't have any food in it, which is pretty obvious, so maybe it's not very interesting. I would have loved for her to take a bath. She took a little bit of a dip earlier. A lot of times with the bald eagles here, I noticed that after eating, they usually will at least do a little splish splash in the egg, in the water pan. So normally even the bald eagles down in our clinic, even after they've all eaten, they will also all try to pack themselves all into the kiddie pool that they have down there for cleaning themselves off. So for some reason, bald eagles, they usually like to do a little bit of cleaning after they eat. Oh, and then we have another question from Addie who wants to know, why is she so loud? So very good question. So bald eagles, they're not very social birds as a rule, right? They're not usually hanging out very close to one another. Usually for the most part, you'll have one bald eagle living in a really nice big territory, and then they might have a next door neighbor who lives several miles away, who's in their territory, and then several other miles away, there might be another bald eagle living in their territory. So it's kind of like if you wanted to talk to your neighbor down the street, but you didn't have a phone or you couldn't write them a letter, you might just have to yell. You couldn't talk really quietly. You'd have to yell so that somebody could hear you at the other end of the street. So I think that's why bald eagles are so loud, is because whenever they're making noise, usually those noises need to travel a really long way so that other bald eagles in the area can hear them. Now, right now, there aren't any other bald eagles in here, but there's me. There's some other weird stuff. I've got some electronics set up. And there might be other bald eagles in the area. There's been, I don't know if it picks up on my phone, but I can hear outside every once in a while. The other bald eagles who are currently outside still are occasionally making noise as well that sometimes she seems to be responding to. So all of it just has to do with when you're living outside and all your neighbors live really far away, you're gonna have to yell. So that's why they're able to be so loud. Really good question. It is pretty noisy. You can see that nice big gust of wind with her wings. I think if those are all the questions that we have, we're almost out of time. So if anyone has any last few questions, otherwise, all of that loud noise is actually made possible by a special organ that birds have called their syrinx. We have, I'll kind of try to show you. We have in our throats our larynx. It's kind of in our windpipe or our trachea. So if you're talking or you're humming, you can like put your hand up against your throat and you can feel the vibrations. That's from our larynx or our voice box. And it vibrates as we put air through it, and that's how we're able to talk or sing or yell or hum. For birds, though, they don't have that same kind of vocal cord system that we do. They have what's called a syrinx, which is actually down near the base of that windpipe, right near their lungs. And so kind of the exact structure of it kind of depends on what kind of bird they are. Birds who are able to, or who need to be able to make really complicated sounds have really complicated syrinx. Birds who make pretty simple sounds have a pretty simple one. But it kind of works like if you ever inflate a balloon. So you kind of inflate a balloon and then you let the air out of it and you kind of play with the opening of the balloon and it makes all different kinds of squeaky noises based off of how kind of wide you make the opening or how skinny you make the opening. That is kind of how the syrinx works on birds. That's how they're able to make all those different noises. Oh, do they fight for territory? Yes, they can. So usually if there's like a really good nesting site, right? You have a really nice big old tree with a nest in it right next to a beautiful lake with lots of fish. There might be some other bald eagles who want in on that nesting site. So sometimes you'll get some competition for either mates or for the actual territory itself. So a lot of times you'll see bald eagles, you'll see two of them flying, and they'll kind of either kind of swoop at each other. There's also the really kind of intense, both a territorial and a courtship kind of display where they'll do the lock talons and kind of spiral down towards the ground. Some really excellent videos we should try to find a link to online as well. So yeah, they're able to kind of compete for territory that way. Usually every year, every kind of early spring, we'll usually see at least a few bald eagles who are brought in with injuries from some territorial battles. So sometimes it can go a little bit poorly, but for the most part, it's a lot of show instead of actually doing any damage. But every once in a while, things will go a little bit wrong. So yes, they do fight for some territory. Last couple of questions. Why are female bald eagles bigger than male bald eagles? And that is true for most raptor species, actually. I don't think there are any really big exceptions to that. The difference, the amount of difference kind of depends on the type of raptor. So something like an American kestrel, the females might be a little bit bigger than the males, or the girls might be a little bit bigger than the boys, but it's not that big of a difference. Whereas you might also have something like a peregrine falcon where the girls are 1/3 larger than the boys, or the females are 1/3 larger than the males. So it kind of depends on the species, how much of a difference there is. In general, the idea is that if you have a larger bird be the one who lays the eggs, they have a little bit more resources there. They have bigger body mass, so they can have enough kind of resources in their body to lay a couple of eggs a few days in a row, and then be able to sit on them and keep them really safe and warm. So they have kind of a little bit of extra body mass to kind of make up for that. And then they're also in a really good position then to defend their nest as well, because they are a little bit bigger. The reason too why you might want them to be different sizes is that way when you have a male and a female living in the same territory, they're going to be eating the same kinds of food. But if you have one that's larger, maybe a little bit less agile, but a little bit more powerful, versus another bird who's a little bit smaller, maybe a little bit faster, able to catch smaller prey, you can kind of divide and conquer a little bit. So you can have a female bird who's able to catch the larger, slower prey, and you can have a male bird who's able to catch the smaller, faster prey, and that way there's plenty of prey for them both to catch, and that way their young can have plenty of food to eat. So it's kind of all the logic that seems to be behind it. That's not true of all birds. There are certainly other types of birds where the males and females are either the same size or that the females might be smaller. So there's a lot of factors that might go into it. But as far as raptors go, that seems to be the case, is that the females tend to be larger. And of course, it's a range, so you might get some overlap depending on that. We'll say one last question. Do they ever cache food like corvids? For bald eagles, not typically, especially around now. What they'll do is they'll bring food up to the nest, and so they might end up with, they bring up a fish, they rip off pieces, they feed them to their young, and then there might be some leftovers that stick around in the nest for a little bit, and then maybe someone gets hungry and eats more of it. But for the most part, bald eagles in particular don't really do a lot of food caching in general. I'm sure that there are some exceptions to that have been documented somewhere, but for the most part, that's not really a thing that they do, especially because they are scavenging and they have so many different options for either catching food or scavenging food. It doesn't seem to be a super big priority for them. But yeah, really good question, because there are some raptors that will cache food, especially your smaller raptors who might catch something that's too big for them to eat all at once, but they do need to eat multiple times in a day. So things like your small owls, your American kestrels, or your merlins, those kinds of smaller raptors will cache food a lot. But in general, your larger raptors don't tend to. Really good questions, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us here. For joining us here with Reading with Raptors. Talked a lot about vocalizations today for obvious reasons. So we will see you all again next week. Until then, of course she moves back. So until then, everyone, one last final vocalization here. One more. With one last big vocalization from Max, our resident female bald eagle here at the Raptor Center. We hope you're all still staying safe and healthy out there, getting out, stretching your legs, looking for birds. Definitely still a great time. I've been seeing a lot of our bald eagles out soaring around. Lots of great birds to go out there and spot. And a lot of other really great wildlife. A lot of wildflowers coming in as well. So again, hope you're all staying safe and healthy out there. And we will talk to you all again next week for another edition of Reading with Raptors. So have a great week.